ahead of the COP26 in the city of Glasgow, London, the director of Nanatila, Sonkita Conteh, says highly vulnerable countries like Sierra Leone must commit to robust climate action. Sonkita Conteh has joined in the studio to take the discussion forward. Great to have you in the studio.
Thanks so much, Lola.
Monday, precisely the 1st of November, the COP26 will commence in the city of London. We are so many issues bordering on climate change in these COPs. The UN conference, the expectation of so many people, will offer concrete solution to save the planet from an unprecedented ecological crisis. And COP26 could be seen as an opportunity to actually reinforce the measures laid out by the Paris Agreement in a more compelling way. And I have seen where you've made an extensive piece domesticating it, calling on the government of Sierra Leone to put robust measure by way of mitigating the impact of climate change. How did you divide this first?
Again, thanks for having me, Froman. As we all know, the climate crisis is an emergency. It's at the same level as an epidemic. And we've seen how destructive epidemics can be. The COVID-19 is one such example. Now, over the years, since several countries came together and adopted the Framework Convention on Climate Change, steps have been discussed to help to bring down the rate of emissions from different countries. So when countries industrialize and they have all kinds of factories, they emit a lot of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And that has an effect on the environment as a whole. Now, the challenge since then has been to reduce those emissions, to make sure that at some point we reach what they call net zero, where we're able to offset whatever we are putting out into the atmosphere. And the reason for that is because we continue to put things out, these dangerous gases out into the atmosphere, the world is becoming warmer and warmer, it's becoming hotter and hotter. And we cannot continue in that vein. If that continues to happen, soils will fail, weather conditions would change, we wouldn't have access to water for our consumption. Many things would happen, and these are very bad things. And so countries are now coming together to say, we need to take action as a collective, as a world, to ensure that we don't get to this state that we seem to be hurtling towards. And as we have seen over the years, the focus mostly has been on the industrialized countries, the ones that have the coal plants, the factories, the ones that are producing oil through fracking or through mining. So the focus has been on them, trying to get them to reduce their rate of emissions, as well as getting them to support non-emitters or emitters that are not at the same level as them, like Sierra Leone, for example, with financing, not to go down that same route. So to use alternative forms of development to get to where we want to get. And so that is about right. That is something that we should focus on. That's important. But in that piece that you mentioned, I'm arguing that countries like Sierra Leone that are most vulnerable to climate change, that have not contributed much to the emission that we see in the world today, should not just rely on those instruments to see that change will happen. That as a country, we can and must take steps to limit or mitigate the effects of climate change, because we are already suffering from the effects of climate change. And it's obvious in the last rain season that we don't have as much rain, and it's not as regular as before. And when that happens, we know that the soils get affected, food security gets implicated, access to water becomes a problem, because that is where we get our clean fresh water for consumption. So there are things that Sierra Leone can do, that the government can do, to mitigate the impact of climate change. Sadly, we have been promising a lot and putting in programs, but we have been essentially undermining those actions. And one of the arguments I raised in the piece is the fact that we still, as a country, continue to endorse and actively participate in the export of timber in this country.
Before we come to talk about it, perhaps many schools of thought might want to look at from the point where they will say, what is currently happening with us as a result of the impact of climate change is not of our own making. It's a kind of a global transmissive repercussion. Those countries, the developed countries that are emitting these disasters, have a corresponding impact on activities. Could it be as a result of us suffering as a nation due to the activities of developed nation, or it is precisely our own very making?
So there is no doubt that what the industrialized countries have done over the years, over the last 150 years, has had an impact on the world. That is very clear. And part of the reason why we have the Paris Agreement and the Treaty on Climate Change is because of that acknowledgement that these countries need to scale back on how they emit these dangerous gases. They also need to put together financing to support countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, to the impacts of their activities. So there's no doubt about that. And we're very clear, and part of what would happen over the next week is that they would put pressure on these big emitters to come up with these funds that they have set out to do, to provide to vulnerable countries, as well as to really up their targets for reducing their emissions. So it is very clear that we are suffering as a result of what has happened over the last 150 years. But, and it's a very big but, Raman, we cannot just sit down and undermine our own very existence by doing things that would increase the impact of climate change on our people. I mean, it does not make sense.
But do you actually see a mismatch when in 2019 His Excellency the President, while addressing Assembly during the Climate Change Action Summit, he reiterated that Sierra Leone is rated as the third most vulnerable country to the effect of climate change. He complained that the country is a victim of actions we have not contributed to, and thus is unfairly and unacceptably paying the price, both in terms of human lives and the lack of development.
He is absolutely right that we are paying the price for what has happened over the last 150 years. That is very clear. There is no doubt about that. We saw what happened in 2017, right? I mean, that was one of the most haunting aspects of our recent history, where in a matter of minutes, over 1,000 people were killed because of the landslide in Freetown. Now, that has a relationship with climate change, and we can talk about that as the program progresses. So the President is right that we are suffering from the effects of the action and the activities of developed countries. But it shouldn't stop there. We can take action as a nation to reduce the impacts of that suffering. And unfortunately, we are not doing that. And that is the crux of my argument, that even though countries like Sierra Leone can rely on the Paris Agreement, the Climate Change Treaty, to call forth for assistance from industrialized countries, we shouldn't just stop at that. There are things we can do to ensure that we reduce the impact, the effect of climate change on our people. And sadly, we're not doing that.
Perhaps the compelling action, or rather the corresponding action of the government by way of mitigating these climate effects is, according to His Excellency, the planting of 100,000 trees as part of a 5-year plan to plant 2 million trees. This is what we put forward as one of the compelling actions.
Absolutely. And taken on its own, that is a fantastic step, okay? Because across the world, we see countries are trying to regenerate their forests, planting more trees, because we know, the science is very clear, that trees are good at capturing carbon, because they take in carbon and they release oxygen. So we definitely need more trees in the world. Unfortunately, we have less and less trees as we speak, because every moment someone somewhere is cutting down a tree and clearing a forest. So those are absolutely compelling actions. But the challenge I have is that on one hand you're saying that you want to regenerate forests, you want to plant more trees. But on the other hand, your government is sustaining a debilitating trade in timber that is affecting our rainforests.
Are you referencing the 2020 Public Finance Audit report?
Absolutely. So when you look at that, you get an indication of how badly our forests are being affected. So that audit report shows that the government made what, $25 million or thereabouts as some sort of revenue from the export of timber. When you do the calculations, Raman, more than 10 million trees were cut down and shipped out of this country in 2019. So look at the math. The president says in 5 years we will plant 2 million trees. And then in that same year, we lost 10 million trees that have been in existence for hundreds of years, that have, that have been there and they have grown from 50 to 100 years. So in that same year, we lost 5 times the number of trees that the president and the government plans to plant over a period of 5 years. So in 1 year, we've lost 5 times of that number. So that is a crucial deficit. So no matter what you do in terms of planting trees, I mean, what you need to pay attention to is keeping what you already have. Because the trees you're planting, they're not going to be as solid as the ones that are already cut down. They're not going to be as mature as the ones that you've already cut down. They've been in existence for 100 years. And they have captured carbon. So once you cut them down, you're releasing the carbon that they've captured for these many years. And the trees you're planting, they're going to be seedlings. By the time they get to maturity, they're not going to do very well for us in terms of capturing carbon. So my argument is, if you want to show that you're serious about fighting the effects of climate change on your people, which is very, very clear, and it's very debilitating, it's not about having programs to plant new trees. The first thing you want to do is to save what you have. And every year we have less and less forests in the country. And that is more than a cause for concern.
And I must be careful what I'm going to say, that the words of His Excellency precisely does not match with the action of the government.
I mean, that seems to be the obvious scenario. Because if you are allowing companies to ship off rosewood trees, to China in that number, and then you're also claiming that you will regrow or plant 2 million trees, a fraction of what you're losing, then that is lip service. That is not addressing the issue at hand. So the issue at hand is we have to put a final stop to the export of timber. It is degrading our forests rapidly. It is destroying ecosystems. It's destroying wild animals. It's damaging communities. That has to stop. We have to find alternative ways of generating revenue for the government as well as giving people livelihoods.
Perhaps the justifiable reason any government official will put forward is they will want to say, in as much as we are not doing well in the FDI, foreign direct investments, that could be one avenue that we stick to the habit, generating revenue by way of keeping governance.
Government definitely needs revenue. Government has to raise revenue, but it has to be done in a way that is not.
Could that be a valid?
Not in that, in my view. I mean, government has to raise revenue, but you cannot raise revenue by destroying your very self, because it will get to a point where you will not be around to even enjoy the revenue that you think you're raising. I mean, the challenge is there. The government needs money, but you cannot. And it's like a human being. How would you want to raise revenue for yourself by chopping off your hands and selling off your body parts? I mean, eventually what would happen is you would die, because you are harming yourself because you want to have something to eat or something to wear. And so how do you go about that? Instead of finding work to do that will not affect your health and well-being, you want to sell off your body parts. So eventually that's what we're doing. The forests are an integral part of our existence in this country. They are the lungs of Sierra Leone. And so if we're cutting them off and shipping them off, then we're going to have problems breathing as a country. We're going to have problems retaining water as a country. We're going to have problems having good quality soil. So the argument that, we need the revenue should not be made, because it's not revenue at any cost. There is a cost. There is a very serious cost. I mentioned that in 2017, in the space of a few minutes, we lost 1,000 people. How much revenue can you equate to 1,000 lives, so even one life? And the cutting down of trees, the shipping off of timber to Asia, is costing lives, and His Excellency alluded to that we're losing people's lives because of the effects of climate change.
But it may seem to many people as a delicious irony. You say one thing, going at international conferences, you speak for action, compelling action to be done. Then back home, what is happening is different.
It is different. And the Minister of the Environment, someone I respect highly,
Professor Jawad,
he was on 98.1 talking about COP, and I listened to that interview, and he spoke about all the nice things that the government is putting in place, the programs to use alternative fuel, but he did not mention the issue of timber logging. I did not hear that. Perhaps maybe he did earlier than I joined the program. But I was concerned that the most obvious elephant in the room in this particular case, which is that we continue to cut down our forests at a very rapid rate, and that is inimical to our well-being, was not mentioned. The very first thing that government needs to do to show that it's serious about the fight against climate change is to stop the export of timber to Asia. It is not helping us, it is harming us considerably. And that is an action that they can take. Okay? We can balance out how we raise revenue, but we can't raise revenue at a detriment. Because in the short term, in the short to medium term, we're going to lose more lives because we're cutting down our forests.
Again, on the question of revenue generation, we cannot only limit our concentration on timber logging, but also the multinational corporations that are coming in for investment, either in the agricultural sector or in the mining sector. They through their activities are corresponding impacts.
Absolutely. I mean, the second action that I call on the government to take is to ensure that before we embark on welcoming an investment, whether it's for mining, whether it's for fish harbor, we have to undertake the necessary due diligence. That is something we don't like to take to do at all in this country. You have to count the cost of the investment, the cost in the short term, the cost in the medium term, the cost in the long term. There has to be a decisive commitment to ensuring that before we give out mining licenses, before we welcome some development project into the country, we have assessed, we have analyzed the implications that it will have on the environment, on health, on society. That is something we need to do on a consistent basis. Right now, we do have the Environment Protection Agency Act, and it has a requirement for impact assessment, but we have seen that that process is not being followed to the letter. And it is there for a reason. It is there for us to ensure that whatever project we're embarking upon would not harm us in the long term in such a way that we will not bounce back from. So it is important that the government takes the issue of due diligence seriously. It is, we need the money, I agree, but you don't want money that would eventually kill you. Right? Because otherwise it's not helpful for you. We need the investment, yes, but if that investment is going to contribute to the annihilation of communities, of societies, then it's not helpful for us. So we need to put in the heavy work up front and make sure that before those investments come in, we have undertaken proper due diligence.
Sonkita, Conteh, let's look from the inter-ministerial front, where the effort of what we call supporting collaboration is pretty much lacking. You mentioned agencies like the EPA, the Ministry of Lands, the Ministry of Agriculture, all of these put together. Often and again, we've been talking as to who actually owns that statutory mandates to actually regulate development. The Ministry of Land is doing something else. When an investor comes in, especially in agriculture, they would have to contact the Ministry of Agriculture, they have their input. The Ministry of Mines is there. They support with the EPA. They come together to give an operational license to a mining company. With all due respect, they deforest. They embark on deforestation, and all of these challenges put together accounts largely for the current problem we now face, with is resulting to the effect of climate change.
Absolutely.
That tie, that coordination, or better put, a coordinate bond on inter-ministerial coordination is pretty much key. We don't seem to know who is in charge. It's either EPA or the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Land.
And I think that was an issue that the Minister of the Environment addressed. I think part of what he wants to do, and I was part of that meeting that he called a while back, he understood this coordination, if you will, of among these ministries and institutions. And so part of the problem is how to make these institutions speak from one forum. And so what he wants to undertake is bringing all of these key environmental institutions together. And so he mentioned that is one of the key successes of his ministry. So they're bringing together, EPA and PAA, Meteorological Agency, as well as the Radiation Authority as well, bringing these under one umbrella, which is very helpful. It helps, in no small way towards coordination and effective implementation. So that is a great step. So at the institutional level, he seems to be doing good, trying to bring all of these institutions together. But the jury is still out. We want to see how that can play out in practice, because indeed these institutions have a role to play. And if you don't bring them together, they could work at cross purposes. We've seen situations where a particular government institution, say a ministry, would give out land in a very sensitive area to an investor without alluding to the EPA or the Ministry of the Environment. And then you see the minister going in there and stopping them from doing anything on the land because they've not done the proper checks and balances. So those kinds of pictures you don't want to see, because it shows the government institutions are not working as a team, they're working at cross purposes. So hopefully that aspect is being sorted out, but we would like to see the impact on the ground, in practice.
Three fundamental challenges. Well, I would imagine, in my view, that the president will address, a large gathering of experts on climate change. Looking back home, the issue of the destruction of the Ottawa Park, one of the famous, relics we have in this country, and also the Black Johnson comes to play, and the exportation of our timber across China. Maybe I don't have the details on top of my head, but I think there is a policy in China that gears towards reforestation. While they are coming to Africa, encouraging the Africans to destroy their own forests. Absolutely. They are back home doing the needful.
Absolutely. Raman, I did a piece earlier which touched on that exactly. I wanted to show what is happening in China and what is happening in Sierra Leone, and how we are basically not recognizing that China is on a drive to protect its forests. They're spending billions, and the last time I checked it was over $20 billion that they had poured into regenerating their forests, and they are succeeding. They're increasing their forests every single time. I came across a piece where they deployed an entire unit, thousands of soldiers, to plant trees for a period of 1 year. So do you imagine what these guys would get in the next 5 to 10 years? They are working assiduously to ensure that they bring back the environment. But unfortunately, we're here and we are destroying, right? We are complicit in the destruction of our forests. And these are the last remaining forests. I mean, over the last 50 years, we've moved from 60% forest cover to less than 5%. That is alarming in itself. But then it's like no one is thinking across those numbers and across those ranges. We are still cutting down the trees. You travel across this, these roads to the provinces. You see these big trucks constantly on the road, transporting the log from the forest to some site somewhere. And it's sad, because the government does not appear to be listening to anyone. A lot of people have spoken, a lot of institutions have asked them that this practice needs to stop because it's not helping the country. You may think, you're making some money right now, but that money is not enough, because you're putting your very existence at risk. And that is what we're doing as a nation. Because we want to generate $25 million, we're going to put hundreds of thousands of lives at risk, because what would happen is that we would have more landslides, we would have more violent rains and flooding, we would have failure of crops, because the soils would not be as productive as they should. We would not have enough water to drink, and we would have a water crisis. So it's obvious that the effects are dangerous for our well-being, for our health.
Maybe maybe that one of the very many ways to address this impending challenge could it be seen where political parties could have an action taken to address climate change embedded within the manifesto? Could it be one of the best ways?
I'm sure if you check the different parts of the parties, you will see something around climate change and protection of the environment there. I mean, before the elections in 2018, my organization, Namati, convened a meeting of all the political parties. We've got people from all over the country,
yes,
people who have been directly affected, absolutely. Yeah. It was a program called Land Our Future, We Land Our Future. And these parties came and they signed up to a pledge that they would protect the environment, they would reverse deforestation, including the current, the ruling party. They all attested to that, they all committed themselves to protecting the environment. But unfortunately what we're seeing today is a complete opposite of what they had committed to. We are not protecting the environment. As a government, we're not taking action to protect the environment. As people, we are also not doing anything at all to protect the environment. And so it's a sad situation. It's a confluence of negatives, and it's dangerous for...
So I bring you back to the question of interministerial or interagency coordination.
See, is a lot of these institutions working at cross purposes, especially when we look at the issue of land and forest. So Ministry of Lands and Ministry of Forestry and EPA and the Ministry of the Environment, they need to do a lot more to ensure that they're working together. I mean, was it several months ago, we saw on TV where the former Minister of Lands had given some land around Godrich, I think, the beach to some investor to build some project there. I think it was some fuel station.
A fuel station.
Exactly. Now he gave them permission and they were doing the work without reference to any of the existing laws that protect that sensitive environment. That is a very sensitive marine space. And then we saw that the Minister of the Environment went there to stop them. I mean, that was a very, that was a not so good sight, you know, for me. When I saw that on TV, I was like, oh boy, this is not good. So you don't want to get that to that level, where a ministry is doing stuff that they should not be doing, because they should have consulted with EPA, they should have discussed, you know, all of those issues. So that is a reality that has to be dealt with, where these different ministries are doing things in their own silos. It's not helpful at all. But I think the president who runs the... So there are a lot of negative impacts that already are being experienced, but then they're being ignored because the government thinks it wants to raise revenue. That revenue is not enough, is not nearly enough to compensate for what we're going to be losing out if we continue on this trajectory.
Still with me in the studio, we move along with the program. The Minister of Energy has on Tuesday, 26 October 2020. Sonkita, in your view, you reiterated the government needing to take responsibility for this failure and recognize the long-term danger that it portends for the people if things are not done differently quickly. And there are a few things that the nation will start doing to ward off the worst. Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
So what are they?
So the first thing I mentioned is, let's stop the export of timber. That's the first thing. I mean, if we do that, what we would be achieving is saving 10 million trees per year from being cut. And that approximates to about 200,000 acres of forest land that will be saved. So the first thing we need to do is to save the trees that we're losing from our old growth forests, from our rainforests, from our protected areas. So the stoppage, and it should be permanent, the stoppage of timber export from our old growth forests should be in place. That's the first thing that government could do. And something like that has been done in the past. They have suspended, you know, timber trade, but I think it needs to stop because it's not doing the country any good. It's not doing our forests any good. Now, if the government is keen to do investments in forestry, there are other ways of doing it. I have mentioned in the past that companies could come in and establish their own forests. And already one is doing that. Microforestry is doing exactly that. So they come in, they take degraded land, they plant their trees, and they can harvest after 6 or 7 years. That is fantastic. That could be done. That could be encouraged. But we cannot allow people to go into our forests, into our protected areas, to simply cut down trees that have been there for 50, 80, 100 years, and for them to cut them away. And then we think we are dealing with the problem by planting a few thousand trees right now. which cannot even compare to what we're losing, and there is no guarantee that all of those trees would survive. So it's imperative that the government takes that action now and begins to look at alternative ways of raising revenue. We cannot be relying on the cutting off of our trees and selling off of our forest to raise revenue, because it is killing the nation.
And you equally mentioned the
it only can be done effectively by those who are living in those communities. So any forest regeneration program, any tree planting program has to be crafted mindful of the people. They have to take the leading role in that. They have to participate effectively, because if we don't do that, then all of those fine programs on paper are not going to work out in practice.
I was thinking about another factor that perhaps is killing us pretty much is ignorance, lack of education. The very local native that are involved in chopping on trees, for which they don't know the impact it's causing. Don't you think that's education?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's these people are very intelligent. We all in Sierra Leone, we know the effect of cutting down trees. We have seen the effect. It's not that it's happening in another country. 2017 happened here in Sierra Leone. People died. When you drive through the road, right, you see the evidence of that, right? So it's clear for all that cutting down trees equals death.
But the question is, what is the immediate link of destroying a forest as Osama Kilemi with the disaster that occurred in Conteh?
It's the same deforestation, right?
It is the same deforestation.
Yes.
Is there an immediate link for destroying a forest at the northern part of the country and having an impact in Conteh?
So across the country, we have protected forests, protected areas. The peninsula is one such. So Otamba Kilimi is another. Okay? So these should have been protected. These should have been free of development. These should have trees growing like never before. Well, what we have done is, because we want to undermine, we claim we want to develop, we want to have our own houses and stuff. So we've allowed the scraping off of those forests. So it's much the same. Someone in government wants money to undertake surveying. He wants money so he could issue out some plan. So they're not careful about protecting what is there. So no one is supposed to be developing anything across the peninsular forest area because it's protected. It's the same thing for Otamba Kilimi. You are not supposed to go in there because it's protected. That is why we have NPAA, the National Protected Area Authority. It should be providing security for that area. But when you talk to them, they tell you we don't have enough, we don't have capacity to protect this, an area that is over 100,000 hectares in size. And so because of that a lack of capacity, people go in, they say, and they cut down trees. But the trees don't just walk out of this country by themselves. They are put in containers and shipped to the ports, and the government charges a fee for that. Now, how could you be undermining your own very institutions and your laws that you've put in place to protect the environment? So it's the same thing that we have transported to the peninsula. We undermine the laws that are in place to protect us, to protect the environment, because we want money. We want short-term gain. And that short-term gain, that pursuit of short-term gain is killing us. And we have seen the evidence. So we're not stupid. As a nation, we know the impact of our actions. That when you cut trees, it equals destruction. But we're doing it nonetheless.
I don't know whether your organization has taken its time off to actually understand the cause of action for the seaweed that is recycled in other regions.
Yeah.
Some geological explanation will tell you it's as a result of sea mining.
So basically, it was interesting when I went to the UK a few years ago, and I went to one of the beaches there. And interestingly, I saw the seaweeds there as well. And I did a bit of research and found that, quite frankly, those seaweeds are meant to be under the ocean. They should be down there. But because of rising temperature of the sea, so they're dying, because those things are living entities, right? The flora. So because of rising sea temperature, again, that is linked to the issue of global warming. Because of rising sea temperature, they're dying, and once they die, they float, and then they begin to be transported to different parts of the world. So even in the Caribbeans as well, you find that phenomenon there, you know. So it's all over the place. And again, we have to take steps to ensure that we curb the rise in temperature. And that is why COP26 is happening this year, it's happening next week. But my word, you know, to us is that I think we've done enough talking and promising and saying of things that we are not willing to do. So that has to stop. It has to stop. We have to take clear action because we have the evidence. It is clear that it is going to harm us. It's going to annihilate us as a country if we don't take action now. And the first action, the most obvious action we could take right now as a first step is to stop the exportation of timber because it is destroying the last remaining forest that we have in the country. It is destroying, you know, look at what is happening in the
Any government official will tell you that could be seen as a rather painful decision.
You have to take painful decisions. When we are sick, what do? We take painful decisions. We take medication that don't taste very well. People undergo operations to cut things out of their body. That is painful, but it is geared towards what? Saving your life and healing them. So we have to ensure that we are taking painful decisions to save our country. Because ultimately, if we don't have water, the soils fail. And when it rains, it floods and people die. And we have to leave this country. Where exactly are we going? We will become climate refugees. And it's already happening. There are people who are leaving their countries and their villages and their towns because they don't have access to water. Because the land is failing. There is drought. So they have to move elsewhere. So they're becoming climate refugees. So we don't want that to happen. So we have a bit of window here. Let's not exploit it. Let's utilize it and ensure that we're taking actions that are responsible.
Now, Sonkita, let's end this discussion looking at another important point that you raised. Government should conduct proper due diligence for any development project or investment. You highlighted this, but let's just reiterate its importance as we likely cause damage to the environment. You mentioned from fish harbor to mining concession, whereas the net impact of a project or investment is negative, it should not be pursued. And the longevity and health of a nation should not be sacrificed for short-term revenue generation. Absolutely. We have one. Black Johnson.
Yes. And it is to note that after several efforts by my organization and another organization called Raj and the people, we still have not seen the due diligence that has been conducted for that particular project. I mean, it is very sad. And the laws are very clear. The laws say you have to conduct an environmental and health impact assessment. Now, has that been done to inform the decision to site the project of the harbour at Black Johnson? If it has been done, no one is willing to show the public that it has been done. And that is part of the problem that we have. We don't want to comply with the law. The very government that is supposed to be enforcing the law and protecting the law and complying with it is undermining the law. So where are these studies? Where are these assessments that have been done? Are you going about it the right way? Now, we agree it's government's role to pursue investment, but we have laws for a reason, because we want things to be done within a certain bracket. And so if they are not done, and that investment is of no merit, if we are basically rubbishing the institutions and the rules that we have in place to guide investment. We just say, oh, let's just have investment at all cost. It's not helpful. We need to count the cost. We need to know what the impact of a project would be before we embark on it.
And lastly, the point you raise about community participation in decision making is pretty much key to know how that will be feasible.
That is very simple. Because when government makes these decisions, they're sitting in Freetown, in the offices at the U building and other places. But these projects, these investments happen in the villages, in the towns, in communities away from site, basically. And if we don't get those people involved and we don't get their consent and their participation, then we're not doing investment the proper way. We're not taking advantage of their presence. These people own the land. These people are most directly affected. They should be part of the decision making. We can't simply be making decisions for them and then simply sending the bulldozers and the machines up into their communities to say, oh, we have decided for you as a government, so there's nothing you can do about it. We have given the land to an investor, they're going to dig it up, and they're going to exploit. So good riddance to you. That is the wrong way to pursue development. The land belongs to them. They are most directly affected, and anything that we want to do has to have their blessing. They must be involved. Now, Laman, you go to Conteh, you go to Seragutai, you look at the environment. It's been destroyed, mostly because when we make decisions on investment, we don't consult, we don't seek the input of the people who are there, who are most directly affected. And it is sad. Now, mining that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, the effects are still felt in Conteh. The effects are still there. Why? Because we've not been involving these people on how to take back, to regenerate land that has been destroyed as a result of mining. So I think we have to move past this notion that, oh, we are government, so we decide for everyone. That is not the case in the 21st century. You don't decide for everyone. You bring those who are most likely affected into the picture so that they can have a say and they can tell you what you could do as a government to mitigate the impact of that investment in their lives.
Now, Sonkita, I must say, I'm looking forward to having you in the studio perhaps upon the conclusion of the COP26.
Absolutely.
What government is going to commit itself
Yes.
actually doing to mitigate the impact of climate change back home.
I would be glad to come back.
Thank you so very much for honoring this invitation being part of this program.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
And this is how I bring the content into this edition of the program. My guest, Director Namati, that's with Conteh. My name is Abdul Have a very wonderful day. Jim Mubarak.